If you ask the academics, they say that trigger warnings are the worst thing in existence and that no one should use them, and then you go on Tumblr and suddenly everyone's using them. So which one is right? Because it's kind of an important issue and we can't just, like, not have an answer, you know? So, trigger warnings. Let's talk about that. So, for all of the controversy around them, trigger warnings, although under different names, are very, very common. In the news, before they put something especially concerning that has too much vulgar language or is maybe about a very touchy subject, they will say the following content may not be suitable for all audiences. That is, not using the exact words, a trigger warning. It's ensuring that someone isn't going to see this when they don't want to or aren't in a state to or maybe aren't ready to, whether that be because of incidents or events that have happened to them or just because they're too young. And ultimately, trigger warnings can mean very different things. Like I just said, for some people it's about age, for some people, well, parents wanting to make sure their kids don't see things, for other people it has to do with traumatic events. And when we use the phrase trigger warning, the word of trigger is when someone is triggered. Although it is an overused word, it does ultimately mean that someone is having a response to something, a negative response to something, because it brings them back to a traumatic event. But then also we want to put trigger warnings in front of things that aren't necessarily because of a specific event, but just because they are unsettling or uncomfortable for someone, but we still use the same language and phrasing, which I think is also part of why we have some of the controversy. The use of the words trigger warning has a lot of connotation with it. A lot of people always assume that it has to do with PC culture and that it's going to encroach on free speech and it's people being snowflakes. Whereas when you word it, like with the news, this may be uncomfortable for some viewers, or this may be uncomfortable for people who have gone through XYZ. People are a lot less confrontational about it because it doesn't have that negative connotation. It seems just like warning someone about something. And I know that that seems very obvious and like they're similar, but people still respond differently depending on what terminology you use, which also makes me cautious about some of the extremes of that all this stuff is bad, because then if you word it differently, sometimes people will change their tune. Is that a lot to unpack in the first 2 minutes? I mean, it's trigger warnings. I don't know what I expect. So recently, like 4 years ago, I believe, there was a study that came out about trigger warnings in academic settings. And it basically said that trigger warnings weren't necessary, weren't helpful, and shouldn't, if anything, might be harmful and shouldn't be used. And that was controversial for a number of reasons. The way that they did their study was in itself controversial, but they did their study by having two sets of people, showing them various upsetting imagery, car crashes, as well as some other things. I will have the study linked below. And one set got trigger warnings saying this content will be upsetting, and the other was just shown the images. They then would test afterwards everyone for how uncomfortable the images made them feel, how upset they were. The results of the study were that the two groups reacted so marginally different when they received trigger warning versus when they didn't. They weren't any significant amount less upset than the others. There's a few problems with this too, is that they didn't isolate for people who might be triggered. They just did everyone, which yes is good for a study, but you also need to make sure that you have some of those people who are more likely to be triggered or have gone through specific upsetting events. Two examples that many people will point to is sexual assault and racism. If you yourself have been a victim of racism, so like, hey, if you're not white and then you're being shown these really upsetting images of like lynchings and stuff, that can be very upsetting, but that's not the same response that everyone is going to have. The other thing is sexual assault. Not everyone has gone through sexual assault, but those who have, when they're being shown these things, are more likely to have a response and it's not fair to any group to be left out of a conversation or left out of an educational setting or an educational unit because it's their education, just because they have gone through these things. The study goes as far as to say that trigger warnings might actually be harmful because they're encouraging avoidance. So this is specifically for people with PTSD, that they might avoid situations that might trigger them. And while to a degree, yes, avoidance is good because it can help you not be triggered, but also there's a degree to which you must become desensitized and you must get over it and work through what you've gone through. So they're saying that these things would be harmful because they would encourage you to do avoidance and do alternative assignments rather than just doing the original thing because you're worried about getting triggered. Now, the internet stance on this is that trigger warnings are helpful and should be used in as many situations as seeing fit. Nowadays, if you're scrolling through different things, you'll see trigger warnings for blood, for language, for certain triggering events. What else do I see it for? I see it for like a lot of things. I've used them in my videos because I've handled very hard, touchy subjects. They're just very widely used. And kind of the thinking is that you don't want to harm someone with your content, and also that nothing that you see on the internet do you have a right to see, nor do you need to see. So you don't have to see this post of a comic with blood in it and violence, so you can easily avoid it by like listing out these words and not interacting with anything with those words, and then you're just helping yourself and not putting yourself into a bad state. And it's not negative on you to have not seen this comic, whereas not reading a paper for an academic setting can be very detrimental to you and your grade and your understanding of the concept. And then with not having a right to see anything, sometimes people will say that like you shouldn't post any of this kind of content if it could be harmful to someone else, but then the argument is that you don't have a right to see every crevice of the internet, and if someone wants to post something, it doesn't have to cater to you. They have a right to post it. But then you put it with a trigger warning and you can avoid it and we're all good. So clearly these stances by these two groups is very different. And there's also some obvious reasons for that. Like I said, you can't avoid academic things like you can avoid things on the internet. But I feel like the internet's understanding of the use of trigger warnings is very different from the understanding of academics. I don't know if it's just because on the internet you're more likely to get the socially anxious, those that have been hurt, or because people are more vocal, or I don't know what it is. But on the internet, like anytime there's something like that, you hear about people who have been very badly triggered by things in the past, and who are very grateful for trigger warnings. And also you hear a lot more about stories, and just you're a lot more conscientious of those things. And it's kind of done with the idea that, like, it's just a small thing that you can do to potentially help someone and ensure that someone doesn't enter a very mentally negative space. Whereas academically, it's very much so seen as something that is encroaching on their teaching, on their freedom to teach what they want with what they want, and just seen very differently. And oftentimes they take it with an approach of a blanket warning is enough, and that an individual warning isn't helpful or isn't necessary, and that people kind of need to be able to deal with these things. And I can see both sides. And especially if you're someone who hasn't gone through anything, I can see why you wouldn't see the necessity of a trigger warning, as well as if you are someone who's gone through it, but you're able to deal with it pretty well and you don't need those things, of why you would be extra dismissive of it. Like, I don't need it. Why? What do you mean? And I feel like there's kind of two sides within the academic arguments of like what to do, because some say, well, I guess there's a multitude. There's just a range. There's a range on the academic setting of what should be done. There's those that say absolutely nothing except for maybe a general warning at the beginning of class. Some that say a small warning before the content. And then there's some who say that you get a warning before the content, and if it's unsuitable for you, you can get an alternative assignment. It will not dock you in any way if you can't consume this content. And while I feel like I can understand why teachers wouldn't want to do the extreme of you get an alternative assignment, you don't have to deal with this thing at all, because it would possibly, especially if it's an integral part to your lesson, into your class, of why this could be harmful to you and your academic teaching freedoms. But also, like, what's the harm in one sentence or one paragraph before you show content to ensure the safety of your students, to ensure that they can continue feeling safe in your classroom, that they can be comfortable, that they can continue on without having to deal with something that was completely unnecessary. And I think some of it has to do with a kind of slippery slope, which is a logical fallacy, that if we let them do this thing, then they're gonna make us do this other thing, and it's a freedom of speech and all that stuff. But like, you also have a duty to your students to ensure their safety and their well-being as best as you can, and I don't see why you wouldn't want to do that for your students. I mean, I am a very empathetic person, and I'm a people pleaser through and through, but like, if one little thing I can do can help somebody, and it's not really that inconvenient for me, then why wouldn't I do it? That is my feelings on things, and I hope that we get more research with much better done studies in the future, because right now is literally this one study. I tried looking for other studies, but like, any blog or article that you read is referencing this one study that they did, which has clear flaws in it and doesn't cover a wide range of topics. And so like, I definitely think we need more research on this. So hey, scientists, please do that, because we need information. So, well, in academic settings, I don't think trigger warnings need to be as vast as they are on the internet. I don't think every time before you show something that has cursing in it, you need to have a trigger warning, especially in a college level class or even above. Part of the argument too is like, for master's level classes, you should be able to make that assessment for yourself and leave a situation yourself. And so yeah, there's a degree to which I think there is a gradual decline of the use of them. Like, if you're in a forensics class and you're not going to be like, hey, there's going to be a dead body here, like, that's kind of a given. You're in a forensics class. Or mental health. Wow, yeah, we're going to be talking about mental health issues and mental breakdowns and all that sort of thing. I think that there is an amount of context that is important, but I also think that they shouldn't be villainized to the point they are. They should be used in logically applicable situations. And I hope everyone has a good day. If you like those friends back there, check out my second channel, and I'll see y'all later. Bye bye. Thank God most people click out before they get to the end.